Today's occurrence happens in a cave in South Wales. Two experienced cave divers were in one of the most dangerous but fascinating cave systems in Wales, and things went terribly wrong. It's a well-known story in diving circles in Europe because the two divers involved in the accident are considered to be some of the best divers of their time. And this accident in particular does a very good job of reminding everyone that rules exist for a reason. I'm Tatiana, and this is the story of Roger Solari. Roger Solari started diving when he was 12 in the Forest of Dean. He constantly explored the area and became so familiar with it that he felt he knew its secrets and geology. He went to Brigham University and graduated with honors in physics. His academic research was on the forest master system, and he wrote about the different caves and mines found in the forest region. While he was in school, Roger was president of the Speleological Society, and he created the Cave Project Group, and was also a member of the Forest Rescue Association. As involved as he was in all of these organizations, he was known to be an introvert, but he was still popular and well-respected in all of his circles. He was also known for believing that there is nothing too difficult to achieve and for always pushing for success. Now, Roger was very dedicated to diving, and in 1974, he met another experienced diver named Martyn Farr. Martyn Farr is a very well-known cave diver and caver known for breaking records in cave diving. In his first 10 years of cave diving, Martyn created a world record for underwater cave penetration in the Bahamas. He is also an author that has written many books on cave diving history, techniques, and different caving locations. By all definitions, Martyn is considered a legend, a leader, an expert in cave diving, especially in the UK. But he started cave diving when he was in college in 1970. Martyn was self-taught, like most people were around that time, and just 2 years later is when he started diving with Roger. They both had a similar level of experience, and for 2 years they explored miles and miles of new caves in Wales and Ireland. When 1974 rolled around, they decided they were going to try and explore one of the longest and most challenging sites in the British Isles. For my non-Europeans, the British Isles are the group of islands off the northwest coast of Europe. It includes Great Britain, Ireland, and thousands of smaller islands. In total, there are around 6,000 islands, and about 4,400 of them are at least half an acre in size, and around 200 of them are inhabited. Reportedly, British Isles may or may not be controversial to call the area because politics, so I digress. But Roger and Martyn wanted to explore the terminal downstream sump in Agen Allwedd in South Wales. Nowadays, Agen Allwedd is known to have over 20 miles or 32 kilometers of passages. It was first investigated in 1949, but the main part of the cave wasn't found until 1957. It was explored more in 1971 by divers who dived through the sumps and discovered new areas in the cave. The diver leading the exploration into that new area was John Parker, but he lost interest in it, so he stopped. Martyn wanted to pick up the exploration after that. Roger was unable to join Martyn during his first trip to the cave because Roger hurt his knee. But during his solo trip, Martyn reached the area that John Parker discovered and found a huge new passage that led further into the darkness. He was so excited, he quickly went down the passage to find where it led to and realized that he had accomplished something that many cave divers hoped to do themselves. He wasn't able to explore it much that day, though, because he was quickly running out of air in his tanks. But he made a plan to come back the following month. Now, in Agen Allwedd, there are multiple round-trip paths, but they all start the same way, using the short entrance and going to the first boulder choke, which is where rocks block the path. There's a long passage that you have to crawl to get through, And after that, you go to the large passageways that are easy to walk through and don't require diving equipment. And while there are the round trips that don't require diving equipment, there are many long and exhausting stream passages that do, and can take several hours to navigate. I mentioned the word sump a few times already, and those are underwater passages that connect dry cave sections. They're like underwater bridges that lead to new, wet or dry, unexplored areas. They're very prevalent in the UK, so to fully explore a lot of caves, you have to be certified to cave dive or sump dive. In America, for the most part, the land caves are dry caves, and to cave dive, you have to enter a body of water first. Now, there's obviously exceptions to that, but the difference is why techniques for cave diving between both countries can differ. The principal belief for the cave diving group of the UK is that once you enter a UK sump, you are fully responsible and accountable for your own actions. Solo cave diving is essential for navigating UK sumps. You can have multiple divers in a sump at the same time, but each individual diver needs to see all of the other divers as being a potential hazard. It's technically team solo diving. In America, you have the buddy system for cave diving, where divers are considered a unit and share responsibility and accountability for their actions. That's because our cave diving is usually a full cave underwater and not a cave where sections of it are underwater and sections of it are dry. To not modify the buddy system when diving in a UK sump, you're essentially making a fatal mistake. Because in a sump, you're adding additional danger by buddy diving, and there's no actual risk reduction from the major hazards with buddy diving in sumps. So with that being said, in June 1974, Roger and Martyn planned for a long trip. They wanted to go to the mainstream passageway and dive into the downward stream of Sump 4. They each had 3 air cylinders, a pair of boots, and a line reel. Roger's reel was 400 feet, and Martyn's was 1,000 feet. Martyn was in front, and Roger followed behind him. Their support divers only went as far as Sump 1, and the dive was going according to plan. Between Sumps 2 and 3, they stopped at an air bell and deposited their partially used air tanks to use on the way out. They continued on to Sump 3 with full air tanks. They pulled on their boots at the extension to Sump 4, and this is where things started getting more challenging. It took 33 minutes for them to make it 2,000 feet, or 610 meters. Before getting into the water, they went over the plan again and connected to a full bottle, putting the ones they were using in reserve. Roger had 2 positively buoyant tanks, and they were underweight. Both of Martyn's tanks were negative. Roger led the way into Sump 4 with Martyn following behind him, and they were both laying line. At some point, Roger motioned that his ears were bothering him. It wasn't something that he hadn't dealt with before. His sinuses caused his ears to have a hard time clearing, and it's bothered him during challenging dives in the past. So this one wasn't too different. But Martyn motioned to Roger that he should head back since his clearing problem hadn't stopped. Now, Roger wanted to continue because he was excited to see everything this new passage had to offer. I mean, again, it was their dream. Discovering a new passage is a big deal, and of course he wanted to be a part of it. Once they got about 50 to 60 feet deep, Roger's line ran out, and the passage they were in clearly still had more to go. The further they went, the deeper the passage went down. So Roger's empty line reel was cut off, and Martyn tied his new line onto it and took the lead. Martyn checked his pressure gauge and realized he was almost through his first third limit of air, but decided to keep going. He knew Roger had less air than him, and they signaled to each other that Roger should head back, while Martyn would keep exploring on his own. Then Martyn turned and kept swimming deeper and deeper into the passage. He swam another 100 feet before he noticed a gravel bank that sloped upwards. This caused him to check his pressure gauge, which made him realize he was pushing it on his air supply and he needed to turn back. Now, this isn't the best situation because in diving, there's the rule of thirds. 1/3 of the total air supply should go towards your trip into the cave. 1/3 of your air supply should be for returning and leaving the cave. and 1/3 is a reserve or backup supply for if something goes wrong. Like if you get lost, have to stay down longer than you originally thought, or have to go another way. But Martyn decided to swim up the slope, since it was pretty steep. He assumed there would be an air pocket for him to breathe and rest for a second. The higher he went, the more air he used. He swam up to where he was 3 feet deep, just under the surface of the water, but still deep inside of the cave, and realized there was no air pocket. Looking down, he realized he only had half a tank of air left, and he had to hope it was enough for him to make it out of the cave. He saw Roger at the roof of the passage too, and signaled to him that it was time for them to get out. It looked like Roger understood what he was saying, but he didn't signal back. Instead, he looked worried. But Martyn assumed it was because he was having a hard time clearing his ears, and because of the extra buoyancy. Martyn dropped his reel on one side and led the way back. He swam as quickly as he could and pushed himself to get out. He went so fast that his ears started hurting, so he stopped to clear his ears and swap valves, and it took about 2 minutes before he continued on out. During that time, there was no sign of Roger, but Martyn continued to surface. He was so relieved when he made it that he waited for Roger to surface too, but he didn't. So Martyn went back to Sump 3 to grab the snacks that they left and carried his empty cylinder. When he made it back, Roger still wasn't there. The longer he waited, the more nervous he became, because he was low on air and he knew Roger had less air than him. It was part of the reason he didn't wait for Roger before. But now that he had surfaced and still didn't see Roger, he decided to risk going back into the cave with his air reserve. So Martyn went back in and started tugging at the line, but it was slack. He decided to swim further in and pulled again. And again, the line was slack. He pulled the entire reel back to him and realized the line was cut 30 feet past the point where the lines were joined. It was around this time that Martyn realized he had to go back to the surface, because he didn't have enough air supply to stay down any longer. Once he did surface, he waited for what felt like forever for Roger to surface. But sometime later, another diver and his friends came back from their 9-hour dive that they did nearby. When they ran into Martyn, he told them that Roger didn't come back from the 4th sump, and the group immediately reported the situation to the cave rescue team and police. One of the divers called to the rescue was the diver I mentioned before, the one that was exploring Agen Allwedd before Martyn and Roger took over, John Parker, and he too is considered to be an expert diver and one of the best available to go in and look for Roger. They tried to recover Roger's remains on Sunday evening, but heavy rainfall in the area caused poor visibility. I mean, they were pretty much looking for the whole night, but they had to stop the search because they couldn't see him. After waiting a few days, they went back on Thursday with a search team of 10 divers, including John Parker. This time they planned to go to the terminal sump where Roger was last seen and find him and bring his remains to the surface. John Parker and a local cave diver went into the cave first, while everyone else waited at the surface. The local diver eventually returned after searching the 3rd sump and said that the visibility was still really bad. John Parker continued searching alone, since he brought 4 air cylinders with him for the dive. When he finally made it to the 4th sump, he had laid over 500 feet of line, but he eventually returned to the surface without Roger's remains, about 3.5 hours after the local diver surfaced. The visibility was still poor, even up to the 4th sump, and after searching for Roger for 10.5 hours, the group of divers decided that the search should be called off to avoid further risk. Roger was never recovered from Agen Allwedd, and what happened to him in the cave is a mystery to this day. Some believe he cut the line after he got tangled in it, but I wonder if he cut the line because he knew he wasn't going to make it out, and maybe he thought he would hold Martyn back, since he was tied to the same line and couldn't get his buoyancy down enough to leave. Martyn said that this accident taught him a valuable lesson, and that was that you must respect and obey the internationally accepted thirds rule. He has never again gone beyond thirds, and when he's training people, he tells them, that they should aim to be even more conservative than that, by turning around a little bit before you even get through the first third of air. Apparently, the section of the cave Roger was lost in meant he only made it 69 feet of the 430 needed to make it back. But what do you think happened to Roger Solari? Leave a comment or review depending on where you're listening from, and stay safe. I'll be back next Thursday. All sources can be found at occurrencepod.com, which is linked in the show notes.